Welcome to Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nettie Liebert. I'm a lifelong horse person and professional equine nutritionist with the goal of helping horses and their humans create balanced diets to set them up for success, no matter what age, discipline, or circumstance. Disclaimer, the information discussed here is based on current scientific research and is for educational purposes only. Every horse's individual needs vary. This is not a substitute for veterinary medicine or nutrition consultation. Hello and welcome to another episode of Farm to Stable, an equine nutrition podcast. I'm your host, as always, Dr. Nettie Liebert, and in keeping with the theme of summer and the extreme heat that many of us in the United States have been facing lately, I wanted to talk about that. It seemed timely. And we've got some tips today about cooling and hydrating for horses, a lot of which are applicable to yourself as the equine caretaker as well. So let's dive right in. Now, when it comes to cooling the body off, horses actually have quite a bit of ground to cover. So we're going to get a little sciencey with this. So what do I mean by that? So let's take an average human that weighs 80 kilograms or about 176 pounds. That human has about 2 meters squared of total skin surface. So that it can be thought of as a body surface area to body mass ratio of 1 to 40. There will not be a quiz, I promise. It's all for context. So now, if we talk about an average horse that weighs 500 kilograms or 1,100 pounds, that horse has about 5 meters squared of total skin surface, or a body surface area to body mass ratio of 1 to 100. Now, why do I tell you this? A horse clearly weighs more than 6 times the average human being, but has only 2.5 times as much surface area to utilize to cool off. So a horse has to dissipate more heat with less real estate to do so. And as you get into some breed differences, those exist too, i.e. a thoroughbred versus a Clydesdale. So a Clydesdale has to work even harder than a thoroughbred. But this also actually works reverse in the cold, so it's easier for a Clydesdale to maintain body heat in the cold than a thoroughbred. But that's for the winter season. So how do horses do it? So my references for this, by the way, will be listed in the show notes. This is from the Marlin and Nankervis textbook, Equine Exercise Physiology in 2002. How do horses cool off? They sweat at higher rates than any other animal. So at maximum capacity, so this is probably not going to happen to your horse, but it can. At maximum capacity, a horse can sweat about 15 liters per hour versus a human that can only do about 2 liters per hour. So think about one of those 2-liter soda bottles. And you'd need almost 4 of them for a horse, and only 1 for a human. So when it is humid, when there's a lot of water in the air, cooling capacity diminishes because it's harder for sweat to evaporate and take heat with it. And you know this if you've ever walked outside on a humid day, especially if you're coming from an air-conditioned environment, you can almost feel the moisture on your skin immediately. So how can horses cool? There are a couple of ways. First is evaporation. It is most effective in warm, dry environments. So if you have a nice day with low humidity, this is when evaporation functions best. Humidity impairs that evaporation because there's already a lot of moisture in the air versus if it's dry. Think of, physics, right? It's going to go from wetter to drier. That's how things dry out. So humidity impairs that evaporation, and horses do rely on sweating for the vast majority of how they cool themselves. But what else? Radiation. So you may immediately think of something radioactive, and that's not what I mean. So this is like the second law of thermodynamics. So heat will transfer from an area that is warmer to an area that is cooler without physical contact. So, for example, this is why if you're standing in the shade, it feels cooler than if you're standing in the sun, because the sun radiates heat. And if you have a shield from that, it'll feel cooler. Next up is convection. So think of this like standing in front of a fan or a breeze, moving air past your or your horse's body. Heat moved by air being forced across a surface and just blowing it away. And the last is conduction. So this is a direct transfer of heat between surfaces. So if you have a hot horse and cool water and you're hosing the horse off with the cool water and scraping that water away, it's transferring heat from the hot horse to the cool water. And then as you scrape it away, it helps to cool the horse. Okay, so a couple of concepts there. Now, what about external cooling support? So you may have already surmised this. Fans in the barn that are appropriate for use in a barn, those white box fans that you can buy in box stores, not appropriate for the barn because their motors are not protected. Cool water, rinse, scrape, repeat. Misting systems like that were developed for the 1996 Atlanta Olympic Games. Shade, night turnout, things like this. Now, what about diet? Of course, this is a podcast that talks about nutrition, so I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about diet. So water losses that are due to sweat are usually replaced by drinking and consuming food. Electrolytes can also be given. So electrolytes encompass several minerals: sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, magnesium, for example. These are all electrolytes. And electrolytes play key roles in the regulation of water content in the body, in the regulation of muscle contraction, normal contraction and relaxation of muscles. So they do a lot of things. And I'm going to get into that. But let's start with plain water and a dehydrated horse. If you give plain water to an already dehydrated horse, you can actually worsen dehydration. This is true of yourself also. If you're drinking nothing but water and you're not consuming anything that contains sodium, for example, in it, you could actually cause a problem. How? Why? Plain water decreases the concentration of sodium in body fluids. That's how it's supposed to work. But this drop in sodium will actually switch off the thirst mechanism. It also tells the kidneys to increase water excretion because the body is trying to regulate the concentration of sodium in the body. So if you think if something is too diluted, it's going to try to get rid of some of the water to make the concentration a little bit higher. But if there's too much, it's going to hold on to water. If the concentration is too heavy, then it's going to hold on to water. So care needs to be taken in how sodium and electrolytes are given. Water follows sodium. If we want a horse to drink, giving some sodium will encourage that thirst response. But again, we have to be careful. There's a couple ways to do it, many of which you've probably done. You could mix electrolytes in a water bucket. But there's a catch. You need to take time to acclimate the horse to this and make sure the horse will actually drink the water with something mixed in and that all of the mixture isn't diluting out and precipitating to the bottom. So get your horse used to it. If you do this, also make sure that you offer the horse a plain bucket of water, because if they refuse to drink something, water with electrolytes mixed in, you still want them to have access to regular water. How about a dose syringe, right? The big, large cc syringe, about 60 cc's or so. You could mix a dose of electrolytes in that with some water and give it directly to the horse. But you do have to be careful with this for a couple of reasons. If the horse has equine gastric ulcer disease or you're concerned about ulcers in the stomach, giving concentrated electrolytes can actually irritate that ulcer. So you may be better off to dose those electrolytes with food, or definitely dilute them down a little bit with water or unsweetened applesauce or something like that. But giving them straight electrolytes if they have ulcers could cause some irritation. So keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to commercial feed, whether you're feeding one or not, they usually don't contain a lot of salt. So you can't always rely on your commercial feed to replenish everything a horse needs, especially if they have been sweating a lot or if it's unusually hot. We had 3 days here where I live in the Northeast of temperature indices over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And prior to that, the temperature had been in the high 60s, low 70s. So it was quite a big change for our horses. So if all of a sudden they're in this hot weather, first of all, you got to make sure they're still sweating. But again, if they've been sweating a lot, you want to make sure that that they are replenishing properly. So it's all about balance. I say that a lot. You don't want to overdo electrolytes either, as too much could cause the body to actually draw water out of circulation and into the digestive tract, away from the muscles and away from the surface of the skin where they might be needed, which could also worsen dehydration. So by now you're thinking, okay, too much plain water, too much electrolytes, what do I do? So in the book that I mentioned earlier, Equine Exercise Physiology by Doctors Marlin and Nankervis, they give a little homemade recipe. Now, if you wanted to mix electrolytes into water, you could take about 3 tablespoons of table salt and mix it with 3 tablespoons of light salt. Now, table salt is sodium chloride. Light salt is potassium chloride. And you could mix that in about 2.5 gallons or about 10 liters of water. It's going to be a salty water. So again, make sure your horse likes it. You could always drop that to 1 tablespoon of each to acclimate your horse and let them to get used to it or see if they even like it. Or you could top dress their feed with 1 tablespoon of each, sodium chloride and potassium chloride. Even start with teaspoons, smaller amounts to get them used to it. Not all horses like that much salt in their feed or with their ration balancer. So it's a little bit of trial and error. Not all commercial electrolytes are made equally. And if you see one or you taste them, and it tastes like sugar, it's probably not a great electrolyte. If it has a lot of dextrose or sucrose in it, it's probably not one that is going to do much for your horse. So take that on a case-by-case basis. So electrolytes, very important for not only muscle contraction, but water balance as well. Now, I mentioned that we had this huge temperature swing where I live, and acclimation is very important. So remember, if we do have that big jump in temperature, as we saw here in the eastern United States, it can take a horse 7 to 14 days to adjust. Now, I talk about this in Season 3, Episode 1, an episode on anhydrosis. So go back and listen to that if you want some more information on climate acclimation. So when you have a big swing where we had temperatures that were moderate and they jumped up 20, 30 degrees Fahrenheit almost overnight, that's a big swing. And it can be a real trigger for things like anhydrosis, horses going off feed, and other things. So you want to keep an eye on those things, eye on hydration. You want to ease up your workload. Nobody in the barn, fortunately, rode for those couple of days. It was just too hot. It was a lot of cold hosing and water feed, offering of fresh water during that time. Keep an eye on your horse and make sure they are sweating. If they seem too hot, if they're panting, that is a red flag, and you want to contact your veterinarian. So the American Association of Equine Practitioners, which is a group for, you got it, equine vets, they've posted some guidelines on their social media channels about adding together the temperature and the relative humidity to gauge the risk of should you ride under certain weather conditions. It's useful, but you have to know yourself and your horse. And I'm going to put the links to that in the show notes. So if you want to check out that infographic, it's really helpful, really great to print out and post in your barn or take a picture with your phone just to reference it. I reference it all the time. But again, I have a senior horse, so if it's getting that hot, he's not doing anything. So more on that in a moment. Also, while I'm on that, it is important to know your horse's TPR. That is temperature, pulse, and respiration. And this is something you want to take normally. You know, nothing's wrong. Everybody's happy before you go riding, maybe before they go out in the morning, because you want to know what is normal for your horse and take it a few times over, a few different weeks and keep track of it so you know what's normal for your horse. And I'm going to post a link in the show notes to a Rutgers University fact sheet that I co-authored in the show notes as well, that's going to tell you what is normal for horses and how to take those measurements. It is important to know these, again, under normal circumstances and monitor them in times of temperature stress. Anytime you think your horse may not be feeling well, it's a way to help you gauge how your horse may be feeling. And when you have this information and you need to alert your vet, then you can give that information to your vet and say, my horse's temperature is elevated or he's breathing a little harder than normal. That's going to be helpful for your veterinarian, who's going to retake those measurements anyway, but it does help for you to have that information for your vet. Now, last, I do want to make quick mention about the age of the horse. As you may know, if you listen to this podcast regularly, senior horses hold a very special place in my heart. And senior horses can have a harder time regulating their body temperature in both the cold and the hot than their younger counterparts. This is true also of the very young horse, so under 6 months of age. So if you have a senior that has trouble, you're going to want to take extra caution and maybe not turn them out in the blazing sun, maybe turn out overnight, or make sure they have an appropriate fan, or that they're getting hosed off regularly and they are sweating and they have an appropriate dose of electrolytes. And it is a natural part of the aging process due to natural declines in cardiac output that contributes to this challenge of regulating body temperature as a horse ages. But it doesn't mean that just because you have an old horse, they're going to have a problem. It's something that you need to know. For example, in the barn where my horse lives, my horse did fairly well during the heat wave. There was a horse down the aisle for him that is about a year or younger that did not. He made it through okay, thank goodness, but he was struggling. He was panting. He was very uncomfortable, whereas my horse seemed to handle it fortunately okay. But the other horse's owners were very conscientious of this. They cooled him off. They brought him in from turnout, which did have shade, by the way, early, and made sure that he was comfortable and had his fan on so that he could get through the heat wave a little bit better. So, in summary, when we have one of these heat waves, even if you are training for a competition, back off. It is not worth risking your or your horse's health in the heat. Now, backing off could mean a lot of things. It could be riding very early in the morning, in the middle of the night when the sun is down. All of these things, you just have to gauge where you are at and where your horse is at. Make sure your horse has shade, access to protection from the sun, and keep an eye on water intake. Even if you have an automatic waterer, there are ways to do that. Offer electrolytes in appropriate amounts to encourage proper hydration. It is best to mix electrolytes with feed or water. Or again, if you're giving it via a dose syringe, definitely something like either water or some unsweetened applesauce. It's just a safer bet, even if you're not sure if your horse has ulcers. Check your horse's temperature, pulse, and respiration periodically so you know what's normal. And then when we do have a drastic change, check it again. Just make sure they're not overheating. Night turnout, if possible. I know where I live, it's really challenging. Not a lot of people do that here, but the barn staff are very conscientious of keeping horses cool and hosing them off throughout the day or when they come in. And barn appropriate fans. This is a big one. I know a lot of us have hung up those white box fans. They are not appropriate for use in the barn. They are a bit of a fire hazard. So it is worth spending the money to get an quote unquote ag fan or something with an enclosed motor that is made for use in a barn. It is definitely worth doing that. And those fans do last a number of years. So it's worth the investment. So I hope that I have given you some extra tips for keeping cool this coming summer here in the U.S. We've only just started summer and we've started off with a bang, a lot of record-setting temperatures. And keep cool, enjoy your horses, maybe take him for a swim. My horse hates the water, so I won't get him to go swimming. I tried, but he will tolerate a cool shower, certainly in the heat. In the meantime, give your horses some extra TLC and happy riding. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. Please share and subscribe if you found the content interesting. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, send it to equinenutritionphd@yahoo.com.